You can't even imagine what it's like to be humiliated at your own Christmas table, surrounded by the people you love most. If you think you know how this story ends, you're in for a shock. Because when my son-in-law called me the most useless man in front of my entire family, he thought I'd just sit there and take it. But what happened next changed everything, and it's a Christmas he'll never forget. Before I tell you what happened that night, I want you to do something for me. If you've ever been disrespected by someone you welcomed into your family, or if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when no one else would, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share your story in the comments. You're not alone, and your voice matters here. Let me take you back to that Christmas. The house was full, my daughter, her husband, their 2 kids, my wife and me. The air was thick with the smell of roast turkey and cinnamon, laughter echoing off the walls, and the twinkle of Christmas lights in every corner. You'd think it was a picture-perfect holiday. But underneath all that noise, there was something else. A kind of tension you could cut with a knife. I'd spent the whole day preparing dinner. It's something I've always loved, feeding my family, making them feel at home. But tonight, nothing felt right. My son-in-law, Mark, had always been sharp-tongued, but lately he'd taken it to a new level. Every little thing I did seemed to annoy him. The way I carved the meat, the way I told stories, even the way I laughed. My daughter, Sarah, just sat there, eyes glued to her phone, pretending not to notice. After dinner, I realized I'd forgotten the dessert in the fridge. I laughed it off, but Mark seized the moment. He stood up, glass in hand, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're such a useless old man. Can't even remember dessert at your own dinner, too. You ever stand in your own living room, waiting for the police and wonder how your family got here?" That's what I felt as Mark paced by the door, his face red with rage, my daughter Sarah sobbing quietly in the corner, and my wife trying to comfort the grandkids. The Christmas tree blinked in the background, its lights mocking the darkness that had settled over our home. Mark kept shouting, "You think you can just call the cops on me, in my own house?" He glared at me, daring me to answer. I didn't flinch. I just stood my ground, phone still in my hand, heart pounding but voice steady. "This isn't your house, Mark. It's mine. And tonight you crossed a line." The minutes crawled by. The kids huddled together, wide-eyed and silent. Sarah finally found her voice. "Mark, please, just stop. You're scaring everyone." But Mark was too far gone. He started ranting about all the things he'd done for this family, all the sacrifices he'd made, how he was the only one who ever stepped up. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who was terrified of losing control. Maybe that's why he lashed out, because deep down he knew he was losing his grip on the family, on Sarah, on himself. The doorbell rang. Mark froze. I opened the door to 2 police officers, their faces calm but alert. "We got a call about a domestic disturbance," one said. I nodded, stepping aside. "He tried to throw me out of my own house. He threatened me in front of my family." Mark tried to talk his way out of it, but the officers weren't buying it. They separated us, asked questions, took statements. My wife and Sarah backed me up. The kids, still crying, clung to their mother. After what felt like hours, the officers told Mark to leave for the night. "You need to cool off," one said. "We'll be in touch." Mark stormed out, slamming the door so hard the ornaments on the tree rattled. If you've ever watched someone self-destruct in front of your eyes, you know how helpless it feels. But you also know that sometimes The only way to save your family is to let the truth come out. That night, the house was quiet. Sarah apologized over and over, her voice shaking. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I never thought he'd go that far." I hugged her, holding her like I did when she was a little girl. "It's not your fault, Sarah, but it's time we stopped pretending everything's okay. If you've ever had to face the truth about someone you love, you know how much it hurts. But you also know that sometimes the only way to heal is to let go of the lies." The next morning, Mark called. He was calm, almost cold. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can just cut me off?" I didn't answer. I just hung up. I was done playing his games. Sarah and I sat down with my wife and the kids. We talked about what happened, about what we needed to do next. "We can't let him come back," Sarah said, her voice firm for the first time in a long time. "Not until he gets help, not until he respects this family." If you've ever had to set boundaries with someone you love, you know how hard it is. But you also know how necessary it can be. That afternoon, I called my lawyer. "I want to make sure Mark can't touch a cent of my money," I said. "Not now, not ever." My lawyer agreed. "You're doing the right thing. Protect yourself. Protect your family." If you've ever taken back control after being pushed aside, you know how empowering it feels. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you forgive or would you move on? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found his strength after being shamed at Christmas, watch it next. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a victim. That night, as I watched the snow fall outside, I realized that Christmas would never be the same. But maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. You ever wake up the morning after a disaster and wonder if you dreamed it all? That's how I felt as I lay in bed. The house eerily quiet. The only sound, the faint hum of the heater and the distant clink of dishes in the kitchen. For a moment, I almost believed it was just another Christmas morning. But then I remembered the look on Mark's face, the fear in my grandkids' eyes, the way Sarah clung to me after the police left. I got up and found my wife in the kitchen, making coffee, her hands shaking just a little. She looked at me, her eyes tired but full of relief. "Thank you," she whispered, "for standing up for yourself, for all of us." Sarah joined us, her face pale but determined. "Dad, I want you to know I'm not going to let him come back. Not until he changes. I can't let my kids grow up thinking this is normal." We sat together, talking quietly while the kids watched cartoons in the living room. For the first time in years, I felt like we were a real family again, honest, vulnerable, and finally ready to face the truth. Later that day, Mark's mother called. She'd heard what happened and wanted to know if I was okay. I told her the truth. He needs help. He's not welcome here until he gets it. She sighed, sadness in her voice. "I always worried he'd go too far. I'm sorry you had to be the one to stop him." If you've ever had to draw a line in the sand with someone you love, you know how hard it is. But you also know how freeing it can be. The next few days were quiet. The kids played in the snow, Sarah and I cooked meals together, and my wife and I talked late into the night about what we wanted for our family. "No more secrets," she said, "no more pretending." Mark tried to call a few more times, but I didn't answer. I let his messages pile up, each one more desperate than the last. "You can't do this to me. I need you. I'm sorry. Please, just let me go. Me home." If you've ever watched someone hit rock bottom, you know how painful it is. But you also know that sometimes the only way to help is to let them fall. One evening, Sarah sat down next to me, her eyes full of tears. "Dad, do you think he'll ever change?" I put my arm around her. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I do know we can't let him hurt us anymore. We have to protect ourselves. We have to protect the kids. If you've ever had to choose between hope and self-respect, you know how hard it is. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you give him another chance, or would you close the door for good? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found his strength after being shamed at Christmas, watch it next. Sometimes the best gift you can give your family is the courage to say, enough. That night, as I watched the snow fall outside, I realized that sometimes the most powerful answer isn't what you say. It's what you do next. You ever realize that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is nothing at all? That's what I learned in the days after Christmas. Mark's absence was a relief, but it also left a hole, a reminder of how much we'd let him take from us and how much we still had to reclaim. Sarah and I started new routines. We took the kids sledding, built snowmen in the yard, and watched old movies by the fire. My wife and I talked more than we had in years, sharing stories, fears, and hopes for the future. The house felt lighter, the air easier to breathe. But Mark didn't give up. He sent flowers, gifts for the kids, long letters full of apologies and promises. "I'm getting help," he wrote. "I'm seeing a counselor. I know I was wrong. Please, just let me come home." Sarah read the letters, her face a mask of pain and doubt. "Dad, what if he really means it this time?" I shook my head. "Change takes time, sweetheart. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. If you've ever watched someone try to claw their way back into your life, you know how exhausting it is. But you also know that sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to keep the door closed." One afternoon, my lawyer called. "Mark's trying to access your accounts again. He's claiming you're unfit to manage your finances. He's filed a petition with the court." I felt a surge of anger, but also a strange sense of clarity. "Let him try," I said. "I have every document, every statement, every witness I need. He's not getting a penny." If you've ever had to fight for your own dignity, you know how empowering it can be. But you also know how lonely it feels to stand your ground. Sarah and I went to court together. Mark showed up with a new suit and a new story, but the judge saw through him. "You have no standing here," she said. "This family has made their wishes clear. Petition denied." Mark glared at me as he left the courtroom, but I didn't flinch. I'd spent too many years letting him control the narrative. Now I was writing my own story. If you've ever taken back your power after years of being pushed aside, you know how good it feels. What would you do if you were in my place? Would you forgive or would you move on? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found his strength after being shamed at Christmas, watch it next. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a victim. That night, as I tucked the grandkids into bed, Sarah hugged me tight. "Thank you, Dad, for everything." I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. That's what family is for, sweetheart. We protect each other. We move forward. You ever realize that the real test of family isn't what happens when things are easy, but how you hold together when everything falls apart? That's what I learned as winter dragged on and the world outside our windows turned white and silent. Inside, our home was slowly coming back to life. Sarah started a new job, one that made her proud and gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The kids settled into their routines, their laughter echoing through the halls, their drawings and school projects filling the fridge. My wife and I found comfort in small things: morning coffee, crossword puzzles, the quiet joy of simply being together. But Mark's shadow still lingered. He sent more letters, some angry, some pleading. He called at odd hours, sometimes just to sit in silence on the other end of the line. I blocked his number, but he always found a way to reach out. "You can't just erase me," he said in one voicemail. "I'm still family." If you've ever had to set boundaries with someone who refuses to respect them, you know how exhausting it is. But you also know that sometimes the only way to protect your peace is to keep those boundaries firm. One evening, Sarah came to me, her eyes red from crying. "Dad, I don't know what to do. The kids miss him. I miss the man I thought he was. But I can't let him back in. Not after everything." I hugged her, holding her close. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah. You're doing the right thing. The kids need to see what real love looks like. Love that doesn't hurt. Love that doesn't shame. If you've ever had to teach your children about healthy love by example, you know how hard it is. But you also know how important it is." Spring came, and with it, a sense of renewal. We planted a garden in the backyard, watched the flowers bloom, and celebrated every small victory. The kids made new friends, Sarah laughed more, and my wife and I found ourselves dreaming about the future again. If you've ever rebuilt your life after betrayal, you know how slow the process can be. But you also know that every day is a step forward. One afternoon, I got a letter from Mark's lawyer. He was moving out of state, starting over somewhere new. "I hope you find peace," the letter said. "I'm sorry for everything." I read the letter twice, then put it away. I didn't need closure from Mark. I'd already found it in the family I still had. If you've ever let go of someone who hurt you, you know how freeing it can be. What would you do if you had the chance to start over? Would you take it, or would you let the past hold you back? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found his strength after being shamed at Christmas, watch it next. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. That night, as I watched the sun set over our blooming garden, I realized that the most powerful answer isn't always what you say. It's how you choose to live. You ever look back and realize the moment you stood up for yourself was the moment everything changed? That's what I saw as the months passed and our family found a new kind of peace. The old wounds were still there, but they didn't bleed anymore. We learned to live with the scars, to let them remind us of how far we'd come. Sarah flourished in her new job. She started taking the kids on weekend adventures, hiking, museums, even a camping trip where they came home muddy and laughing. My wife and I found joy in the little things: baking bread, tending the garden, reading stories to the grandkids before bed. Mark's absence became less of a shadow and more of a memory. The kids stopped asking about him as often. Sarah smiled more, her laughter genuine, her eyes brighter. I realized that sometimes the best thing you can do for your family is to remove the source of their pain, even if it means making hard choices. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Sarah raised her glass. "To Dad," she said, her voice steady. for showing us what real strength looks like. The kids chimed in, and my wife squeezed my hand under the table. I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of belonging, of being seen, of finally being enough. If you've ever doubted your worth because of someone else's words, you know how powerful it is to reclaim your value. What would you do if you had the chance to rewrite your story? Would you take it, or would you let the past define you? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found his strength after being shamed at Christmas, watch it next. Sometimes the best answer is simply living your truth. That night, as I watched the stars from the porch, I realized that Christmas wasn't ruined after all. It was transformed, and so was I. You ever realize that the best revenge is simply living a life that's full and true? That's what I discovered as summer rolled in, and our family settled into a new normal. The pain of that Christmas was still there, but it had faded into the background, replaced by laughter, new memories, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Sarah and I grew closer than ever. We talked openly about the past, about Mark, about the mistakes we'd all made. The kids flourished, their confidence growing with every day that passed. My wife and I found ourselves dreaming again, about trips we wanted to take, books we wanted to read, gardens we wanted to plant. One afternoon, Sarah came to me with a letter. It was from Mark. He'd found work in another state, was seeing a therapist, and wanted to apologize again. "I know I can't undo what I did," he wrote, "but I hope you'll remember the good times too. I'm trying to be better." Sarah read the letter aloud, her voice steady. When she finished, she looked at me. "What do you think, Dad? Should I write back?" I thought about it for a long moment. "That's up to you, sweetheart. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not just the other person. If you're ready, write back. If not, that's okay too. If you've ever had to decide whether to let someone back into your life, you know how heavy that choice can be. But you also know that sometimes the best answer is the one that brings you peace." Sarah decided to write back. Her letter was honest, kind, but firm. "We're happy, Mark. We're moving forward. I hope you find happiness too." The days grew longer, the garden bloomed, and our home was filled with light. I realized that the answer I gave Mark at Christmas wasn't just for him. It was for me, for Sarah, for the whole family. I'd stood up for myself, and in doing so, I'd given us all permission to heal. If you've ever found strength, in your own voice, you know how life-changing it can be. What would you do if you had the chance to speak your truth? Would you take it, or would you stay silent? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found his strength after being shamed at Christmas, watch it next. Sometimes the most unforgettable answer is the one that sets you free. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the fireflies, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for my family, for my courage, for the chance to begin again. You might think a story like this ends with a dramatic confrontation or a final word, but the truth is, real healing happens in the quiet, everyday moments that follow. As autumn returned, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened since that Christmas dinner. The pain, the anger, the courage it took to stand up for myself, and the peace that followed. Sarah and I continued to grow closer. The kids thrived, their laughter filling the house, their drawings and stories covering the fridge. My wife and I found new joy in the routines we'd built. Morning walks, family dinners, evenings spent reading together. The shadow Mark had cast over our lives was gone, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Sarah raised her glass. "To Dad," she said, her eyes shining, "for teaching us that respect is earned, not given. For showing us what it means to stand up for yourself and for your family." The kids cheered, my wife squeezed my hand, and I felt a warmth spread through me that I hadn't known in years. I realized that the answer I gave Mark at Christmas wasn't just a comeback. It was a turning point. It was the moment I reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and my place in the family. If you've ever doubted your worth because of someone else's words, you know how powerful it is to finally believe in yourself. What would you do if you had the chance to rewrite your story? Would you take it, or would you let the past define you? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen our story about the father who found his strength after being shamed at Christmas, watch it next. Sometimes the best answer is simply living your truth. As the holidays approached again, I found myself looking forward to Christmas, not with dread, but with hope. We decorated the house, baked cookies, and made new memories. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer controlled us. We had learned to forgive, to move forward, and to cherish the family we had. Mark never came back, but I wished him well. I hoped he found the help he needed, the peace he was searching for. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about letting someone off the hook. It was about freeing myself from the weight of anger and resentment. That night, as I watched the snow fall outside, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. For my family, for my courage, for the chance to begin again. If you've made it this far, thank you for being part of my journey. Maybe you faced your own heartbreak, or maybe you're still searching for a way to heal. Whatever your story, know that you're not alone. There's always a way back, even from the deepest pain. So what would you do if someone tried to shame you in front of your family? Would you stay silent, or would you stand up for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the hope someone else needs. And if this story touched you, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Check out our other videos, especially the one about the father who found his strength after being left behind. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we live through, and the ones we choose to tell. Thank you for listening. Hold your loved ones close, and remember, sometimes the best answer is simply living your truth.